Good morning, my name is John Crellin. I'm General Manager here at the Boston Harbor Hotel, and we're once again pleased to have you with us for our ongoing speaker series program. Today our discussion is on transportation and the importance of investing in our transportation infrastructure. I'm sure everybody commuted some way to here today. I know I drove. It took me 4 minutes. Usually I walk, which takes about 22, but I haven't had a long commute in many years, and but I know some people do, and I can imagine how much fun that is and how important the issue of transportation is. As many of you know, we were built here on the when we opened in 1987, across the street from this once crazy central artery, and have really benefited from the transportation investment in the community that's really transformed our city and made our spot here on the harbor all that much better. Today we're privileged to have with us leading transportation experts and community leaders. We have former FAA Administrator Jane Garvey, Somerville Mayor Joe Curtatone, and UMass Amherst Professor John Collura, and State Senator Tom McGee. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you, Ms. Garvey, as well. And of course, we have our good friend and communication partner, Tom O'Neill, and his group at O'Neill Associates. We have a great partnership with them, and they do real well for the hotel. We enjoy our long-standing partnership. So thank you for your time, Tom, and your team's work on putting this session together. Here we go.
Hold the applause, everybody.
The applause for him, not for you.
Thank you, John, for the longest introduction I've had today. Yeah, I do know. Welcome, everybody. This is a hot and timely issue, transportation. The President of the United States has called for an infrastructure fund to be created over these next couple of years, and our own governor has called for an increase on expenditures in transportation of $1 billion a year over the next 10 years. We have with us people who are certainly transportation experts. John Collura, who is the professor at UMass Amherst and heads up the Center on Transportation. His background is in civil and environmental engineering. John, it's wonderful to have you here. Joe Curtatone, who is the mayor of Somerville, the 5-term mayor of Somerville. He runs a city which people in Massachusetts call the best-run city in Massachusetts, and he does, too. Time magazine made the city of Somerville 2 years ago one of the most livable places for young people in the country. Joe Curtatone has done just an extraordinarily great job of leadership. Tom McGee, the state senator from Lynn, Massachusetts, is our third panelist. Tom comes to us from a family of great political tradition. He's a wonderful leader. He sits on the Transportation Committee. He's co-chair of that committee on Beacon Hill, and he also importantly happens to be a conferee in the Conference Committee on Transportation as they begin to narrow down and compromise what's going to take place on Beacon Hill. The moderator for today's show is an old friend, Jane Garvey, I think the first and only woman ever to head up the FAA, certainly for a 5-year term, the only person certainly to do that, appointed by President Clinton. She once, longer ago than that, worked in the Dukakis administration as head of our Port Authority. She provided great and wonderful leadership at the FAA during our 9/11 debacle, and she did just a tremendous job in taking our transportation people through that era in time. Jane Garvey is a long and trusted friend. She's a great gal to have here, and I'm so happy she took the time to travel to Boston to be our moderator for this morning's panel. Jane, come on up.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I have to say that was a lovely introduction. I think earlier this week I was in D.C. and was introduced as a former high-ranking government official, which when I told John Cahill he said, that's better than government source close to the investigation. So I am thrilled to be here, and particularly honored to be among the leaders, I think, really in innovation and transportation in the state of Massachusetts. And I have to say, so much of what you see on a national level, I think Massachusetts has really led the way through the years in any number of programs, particularly in recognizing the relationship between transportation, economic growth, and the environment, 3 very, very critical issues. Again, I think John Cahill earlier mentioned that there's been a 30% increase in congestion just directly related to the economic development that we've seen in Boston and the Boston region. So wonderful news to see New England coming back, and coming back first, really, in the nation. But the flip side, of course, is the congestion. So we have 3 people who have been wrestling and thinking about this issue, and if I can, we want to make this very interactive. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to offer a few comments, several minutes of comments, and then we will engage in some questions. And I know from talking with some of you that many of you have questions as well. Perhaps we can begin with Senator McGee, who is at my far left here. Really far left, is that right? So to speak.
Some people would say that.
Okay.
Good morning. Glad to be here this morning. It's interesting, since 1987, there's been such a transformation in this area. And as I was walking down from the State House, walking along Atlantic Ave, remembering what it was like walking along Atlantic Ave in 1970s, in the 70s. And I like to say what the 4-point channel probably looked like in the 1970s before we cleaned up Boston Harbor, and what investments in infrastructure and transportation mean to our economy. It couldn't be clearer, I think, in Boston. And I think the challenge we face is getting people to understand that the investment, particularly when we look at a statewide plan that we're talking about, and people outside the 128 belt struggling to see how the investment in transportation has helped their area. How do we make investments in regional transit authorities? How do we continue to make investments that make a difference from Pittsfield to Boston? But I was really struck by the changes or the transformation. My wife works over on Congress Street, not far from here, right across from the Children's Museum, and their company moved over there about 22 years ago, and so we've had a chance to see the transformation in this area, particularly when it's easy to criticize the Central Artery project and say it was over budget, took too long, could have been done better. But I always say to people who maybe criticize it or talk about was that the right investment? Would you like to go back to the expressway across the street standing there? Or would you like to go back to what South Boston was before that, or what Boston was and the region was before that? But when I was, my 15-year-old twins, who we were coming to see my wife on her birthday, coming up the pike. I picked my daughter up at school in Newton. And we came up the South Boston exit, coming straight into South Boston up the turnpike, the Mass Pike. And I said, and it struck me as I came to the stop sign, and I said to my children, when your mother started working down here, there wasn't one thing in this whole panorama we're looking at that was here 20 years ago. And that transformation has happened because we made a major investment, because people had a vision for what Boston could be 30 years ago and said, we need to get rid of the expressway, we need to build a tunnel that's going to access Logan Airport to the rest of Massachusetts. We need to grow our economy by taking a huge step and making a major investment in transportation, including the Silver Line. And because of that vision, we can look out this window and see the transformation today and see it in Boston. So the challenge for us is to get my colleagues, the business community, and more importantly the constituents we represent, to understand that this isn't just about buying some trains. It's not about expanding the line somewhere else just because it's a line item or it's something that someone wants to do for their district. It's really about how do we see our future and how do we expand our opportunities for the whole Commonwealth, and that really key to that economic development is transportation. And I'll just, on the congestion piece, it strikes me every day because my district is impacted by the traffic that sits on Route 128 going into 93 every morning, backs up to Linfield and beyond every day, coming back in the other direction, or the traffic from the Mystic Bridge going north at the end of the day, getting bogged down in Copeland Circle. We built the Technology Highway, Route 128, another visionary, I think. People in the past had a great vision about that, and all of the different businesses that grew there because of the talent we have and the resources in Massachusetts. But there was no plan for what happened when all those jobs were created. So today it's like it's really the technology parking lot, because we built the roadway without understanding how do we continue to grow our options for getting those people to the jobs once those jobs were created because of that initial investment. So we need to, I think, continue to not only address transportation this year and hopefully get a bill that moves us forward substantially, with support from the governor and my colleagues in the legislature. We need to talk about how much in transportation keys our economy every year. So we really need to look at education, healthcare, and transportation, in my opinion, as how it allows us to grow our economy and how it can, and to continue to have a plan how we go from here. The T and transit are going to be getting to capacity level soon. There's going to be issues with making those investments that are going to continue to allow us to be a place that people want to come and grow their businesses. So that's our challenge. How do we as a Commonwealth focus on that, build support, and allow us to get the resources necessary to make those investments, and then see the huge private development that follows those public investments. So glad to be here this morning.
Thanks very much, Senator.
You're welcome.
Mayor?
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Jane, nice to be here. Thanks for all being here. Thanks for the Boston Harbor Hotel, and in particular O'Neill and Associates for allowing me to be part of this great panel to talk about something that's near and dear, not just to me personally, but my community of Somerville. We have a pretty keen understanding about the successes and failures around planning for or in divesting or investing in transportation. We were a community built around transit with almost 20 rail and trolley stops until mid-century, when we essentially abandoned the rail systems for the automobile, when we were forced to take I-93, which uprooted hundreds of homes and thousands of people, and expand 28. And we have all this transportation infrastructure in Somerville, including 3 commuter rail lines that don't stop. And we've seen Somerville transform to something that we weren't real proud of. So the lack of planning and lack of investment really had an impact on our local economy, on job growth, housing, and our overall quality of life, as well as, more importantly, our health. And we truly believe that a modern, comprehensive, efficient, reliable transportation system is really a non-negotiable requirement for a strong economy. I mean, for healthy communities and for a decent quality of life in every corner of the Commonwealth, not just Somerville. Today, we see the promise of a better future where truly the canvas of our city is being repainted. The first rail station, and this is actually a sad statement, but the first rail station in this Commonwealth in 27 years is being built in Somerville, Massachusetts today, in Assembly Square. Catherine, it should be a topic very keen to you since you worked on that project with me, which is unlocking $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion of private investment. The Green Line extension, which the first phases have already started, will bring in tens of thousands of new jobs to the Commonwealth, hundreds of millions of net new tax revenues to the Commonwealth and region, improve our air quality. This is really a values discussion. It's about what type of state we want to be in the next generation, who's going to live here, who will invest here, and it's a competition. It's a competition around the country and around the world. Will Massachusetts have a competitive place in the 21st century global economy, or we're going to stay back in the dark ages? Will we have a transportation system that connects us to jobs, housing, and academia and opportunity? And that's the question before us. You know, Senator McGee has been a true leader on this, and I'm excited to be on this panel with him. And I think we're on our way to set the framework to get that done. But if we do not get it right, we will be left behind. The state will be left behind. We'll lose jobs. We'll lose investment. People will move out. But if we hit it right, Massachusetts would be in a true position of strength in that global competitive market. So I'm really excited to be here today to share a little bit about our story in Somerville and how we've planned for the future all around transit and infrastructure investment, and what I would argue Massachusetts should do and needs to do. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jane. Again, I'd like to thank O'Neill and Associates for the opportunity to be here. We academics, and especially those of us in the civil engineering community, always look for opportunities to be able to talk directly with elected officials and those of you from the business community. We understand that our role is to offer you suggestions, good ideas, recommendations, but ultimately the decisions are made by the policymakers, and it's important that they get the message from us clearly, and that we do our job in a responsible and reliable manner. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, and so know the Boston area quite well. Got started in the transportation business in a family business right on 128 back in the mid-'60s, so I've seen what investments in transportation have done out on 128 in the Winter Street, Totten Pond Road area. And in fact, just in the last few years, what they've done to be able to improve access, which is extremely important to business people who are either contemplating additional development or they're trying to fill empty buildings that have been vacated and are empty. And then on the other extreme, there are those out there who are looking for jobs. And I know a most recent poll, I think it was conducted in conjunction with the Senate race, states that the people view the economy as the #1 issue here in Massachusetts. So I think that we in the civil engineering community who focused on transportation know that it is the backbone to economic growth. And I'll promise you that'll be the last metaphor I'll use today. As an academic, I know sometimes we get carried away. I think a few other points I'd like to make playing off of the mayor and the senator's comments is that we have to go beyond just maintaining our infrastructure. That's extremely important because any of us who have assets know that preventative maintenance and rehabilitation are critical. But if we're thinking about achieving broader goals like creating jobs, filling empty buildings, reducing congestion, we need to expand the system in selected locations. And I think that it's important for me to note that this goes beyond highway expansion. We need to look at transit, rail, bus. We need to look at non-motorized transportation and the role that it plays in Western Mass in commuting and in other parts of the state in terms of tourism, which we realize is a huge element of our economy. I think it's important to note that there are projects that range from Canton to Woburn on 93, 95, 128 corridor that are selected locations where if you travel there at 8 in the morning or 5 in the afternoon, it's extremely difficult to traverse that section of roadway. I think that for those of you who rely on the T, many of the vehicles need to be replaced, in particular orange and red line vehicles, 30, 40 years old, and with the help of the USDOT and perhaps the elected officials in Beacon Hill, we'll get the capital funds that we need to replace those vehicles. And perhaps thinking outside of the box by bringing a manufacturer, final assembly manufacturer here to Massachusetts, so that when we spend that $1 billion+ to replace those cars, we've also created jobs here in Massachusetts, and not just construction for such a facility, but long-term jobs over the course of 5 to 10 years. So I think, in summary, the main point I'd like to make is that we need to go well beyond just simply thinking about maintaining and rehabilitating the current infrastructure. We do need to expand it if we're thinking about improving economic development, while at the same time acknowledging that there are other important societal issues surrounding sustainability, the environment, air quality, which also have to be taken into account when we think about the economy.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. I know there are questions, but if I could just perhaps pose a couple of questions to the panelists before we open it up. Senator, could you talk a little bit about how you see the process unfolding with the discussions that you're involved with in the State House these days, and where you might see some barriers as well?
Like the conference committee was just was named by the end of last week, but the House has actually been in doing their budget. I think they completed it last night. So I'm anticipating that we'll be, over the next couple of days, we'll be scheduling meetings and trying to get together. And I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to find common ground. The Senate did move in a bit more aggressive direction, I think, in terms of revenues. But we did work within the framework that had initially been agreed to between the House and Senate, which I think lends itself to some positive discussions as we move forward. And I think we're moving closer to probably what the need is in terms of what the governor's articulated in terms of $1.2 billion. The Senate numbers were about $800 million in transportation investment by 2018. So I'm optimistic. I think there's a real opportunity, and from the positive side, if you had said 3 or 4 years ago we were going to be talking about a $500 or $800 million investment in transportation, I'm not sure that people would have believed that that was going to happen. So I think we're in a pretty good place, and I'm looking forward to the discussion in the conference committee to move that forward and get it to the governor.
And I think certainly given what's happened at the federal level and where we're seeing really funding leveling off, not increasing, these actions become even more critical and important. Mayor, could you touch a little bit on Assembly Square, which has been fascinating to watch and to see? How did you work that out? What were the steps that you went through? What were some of the challenges that you met, and how did you deal with those?
Assembly Square is the model of urban transformation, and any urban transformation really in this country takes about 20 to 30 years of full completion, and we're in year 15. And yet we've seen there have been many challenges. The infrastructure piece, solving that, is one of the critical challenges for any investment opportunity. We have to have land assembly, remediation, and then we're building a neighborhood on the river where one never existed before. No street grids, no utilities, great highway infrastructure around there, none of it penetrated the site. And 2 rail lines that go through the district and didn't stop. So what we were able to do is plan to invest $130 million of public monies, and we used different financing tools. We had direct grants from the state, we used I-cubed funding, we used district improvement finance funding, DIF funding, and in combination between the city, state, and federal government, $130 million to build the street grids, to build the rail station, the water, sewer, utilities, leveraged initially $1.5 billion of private investment, which just these initial phases will result in 23,000 net new jobs to the Commonwealth over the next several years, 17 net new million property tax dollars to the city of Somerville, tens of millions of broad-based tax revenues to the Commonwealth. I believe Assembly Square is the poster child of how that partnership should work and why infrastructure investment is critical and what it can yield. And that's a pretty good return on your tax dollars. But it's been a challenge, and I will tell you, one of the challenges for municipalities is there's really no one in the state saying you have 130 acres of undeveloped land closer to downtown Boston than most of Boston. Infrastructure surrounding, none of it's serving. We can create this and let us help you. Here's what we can leverage. Here's what we can bring to the table. No one said to Somerville in 1984, would you like the Red Line station in Davis Square? Tommy, that was you and Mike Dukakis, and thankfully we said yes. No one said, would you like the Orange Line station? In fact, in 2004, the Commonwealth told the city of Somerville, not only do you're not getting it, we just don't want it there. So there's so many opportunities to have that selective expansion and investment to unlock so much for the economy and quality of life. We're real proud of what's going on in Assembly Square because it's that sort of inherent tenacity and persistence of our community that's leveraged that opportunity.
That's great. And John, you made, I thought, a very interesting comment that we need to go beyond maintenance. And yet, when you look at the federal budget, that's what we're really seeing, maintenance, except, as Tom said, for the infrastructure bank that the president is proposing, but that's got to all be debated. How does a state or a local government, how do you decide which are the right strategic investments?
Well, it's a good question. I think ultimately it's going to be decided in the political process, but I think we as members of the professional community, working with engineers, planners, economists, and people from other disciplines, try to come up with plans that show that such and such an investment will produce such and such a return.
So would you see grants, for example, being linked to that, almost more in a sense?
I think that what's key is there needs to be a solid, comprehensive financing strategy so that you can have some choices. Because if the attitude is to just maintain what we have, then the question you raised is moot because we don't have enough funds unless we have that comprehensive financing strategy. On that note, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts that are being made on Beacon Hill and commend the legislature for looking at the financing the way they are now. As the senator mentioned, it looks as though some serious moves are going to be made. Exactly what, we're not sure. But they are considering both user and non-user revenue sources, which I think is critical if we're going to develop the comprehensive financing strategy that we need, as opposed to just relying on one major source like the gas tax, which has been a tough nut to crack in the last 20 years with serious debates and lots of speeches, but no action. And we're at that point where we have to do something. And to rely on only one revenue stream is not good strategy. We can use the example of those of us who have been told by our financial experts, you need some diversity in your portfolio, okay? You don't want to just invest in one type of investment. Well, we don't want to rely on just one revenue source. We need the gas tax, and as, again, the legislature is considering, indexing it to inflation, which is something we haven't done. And as a result, its buying power has eroded. And I think that by looking at a restructured gas tax along with non-user revenues, as well as tolls, and being a resident of Western Mass, I have to admit, with all due respect to my friends back in Western Mass, that it makes sense to me to bring tolls back to Western Massachusetts. When we're in the situation that we are now, looking for revenue streams which are efficient, which are effective, which are fair, and which are easy to implement. Mm-hmm. And so I think, in order to come back to your original question, Jane, on how do we decide on which projects should be funded, we first need that financial strategy so that we generate the revenue so that we can choose between the project down in Canton and the one in Woburn, or perhaps both. And whether we refurbish cars at the T or we replace them, or whether we do extend that green line or that blue line as planned. And without the resources and that financial strategy, many of those projects will not come to fruition.
So good point. So you're really making the point that it's got to be multiple strategies, which is something, by the way, the federal government, I think, has acknowledged as well. There's a terrific report that was done a couple of years ago by a finance commission set up by Congress that talks about multiple streams for funding transportation, and it needed to be an assortment of tools. And I think many of the points that you've made. Let me open it up for questions and see if there are any questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
I have a question for Mayor Curtatone and Senator McGee. What are you guys' opinions on, there's a lot of talk about economic generators, what are your opinions on casinos, seeing as we may get one in Everett or East Boston in the near future, and how would that tie into transportation infrastructure?
Yes, sir. Well, personally, I'm against casinos. Casinos don't build communities. They polarize consumers. I'll go through a whole philosophical opinion why casinos aren't what we should be leveraging for our strength. I mean, I understand they're going to be a reality, but I felt the Commonwealth should always leverage its strengths in research, in history, culture, our geographic strength here in the New England region. As one key developer said to me once, casinos don't build communities and don't build an economic base. I have a lot of concerns about them coming to Massachusetts. I understand they're coming. I have greater concerns about where they're going to be sited, especially if they're in the urban core and near Somerville. My good friend, the mayor of Everett's got to do what he has to do for Everett. As I said to him, we have $130 million of initial public investment in Assembly Square. How can I support a casino down the street that could really impact the future tendency of that project? So I think this is another area where I hope the Commonwealth, and I spoke to members of the cabinet, and they take a close look at how we're strategically planning for the future, where we're making our investments, and how we could be counteracting those investments. So given the fact that they're coming, I hope we're smart about where they're going.
Thanks, Mayor. Senator.
A little different perspective. I supported the proposal in the legislature, and we had a chance to, the mayor makes some good points. We had a chance to see what 38 plus other states have done in terms of casinos, directing that any proposal takes a serious look at how it is going to impact both the local community, the surrounding communities, and how we move forward on it. But it's reality is about jobs, and at least an initial investment of $500 million in capital proposals at some of the sites have talked about $1 billion in infrastructure investment. And in some ways, hopefully parlaying those investments into larger investments in transportation and other opportunities for growth and jobs. So it's recognizing the downside to it. I think that the legislature and the governor took a serious look at it and realizing that there is opportunity for creating some jobs, both construction jobs and long-term jobs, and also recognizing that those dollars are going to be utilized, particularly some of those dollars will go to transportation, and then what kind of investments need to be made on the transportation side. If Suffolk Downs is chosen, then the question then becomes how do we parlay that investment with investment then we're going to need to make in transportation infrastructure. But just as importantly, can we parlay that investment into a much larger investment in that corridor, which has not been really invested in transportation. And kind of the investment ended at Logan Airport. North of that has been a real problem for years. So recognizing that it is the law, we are going to move forward. When a site is chosen, it'll be important for the state, working with whatever location is chosen, that we make the infrastructure investments from our perspective and ask them to make the investments we expect them to make to improve the quality of infrastructure in the region.
Thank you both very much. Question? Yes, Jeff.
My name is Jeff Rosenblum with the City of Cambridge. So one thought that we have is that over the last decade, about 10 million square feet of developments happened in Kendall Square with zero amount of extra traffic, and that has been the mantra that we've been doing. The only way that happened over the last decade is because of available space on the red line and on the green line. And so we've been able to take advantage of that. Over the next decade and the next 2 decades, we're planning ahead and saying, how can we continue this type of growth when the whole system is growing? By 2035, there'll be only a 7% increase in roadway demand, but a 30% increase in transit demand. So that's the type of projections that our regional planning agency are putting for our future for Boston if we want to be the type of place that people in this room, I think, want. So the question that I have is over the past several decades, the federal government has changed its funding patterns around housing. And I think we're starting to see that same pattern happening around transportation. So for the Senator, what are your thoughts on how to move forward as a state when federal transportation dollars are trajectory decreasing and the state has to recover and figure out how to deal with that, similar to how the state had to deal with the loss in federal housing funding? I'm just trying to think of, are there lessons learned? Are there things that we need to be thinking about in planning for that transition?
I think not only do we need to be planning about it, but I think you make a point that I think I made earlier, is this discussion, we can't just solve the problem in what we're going to do over the next few weeks and send it to the governor. That's not a solution. That's a step in the right direction. The real solution is business leaders and planners and others around the Commonwealth need to directly talk about this and understand that that's where our future is, those investments, and then to build support in the public. I think the challenge right now is probably there's a lack of trust in terms of the dollars that are spent, the way the system is run. Are we really doing it? Are we doing it the best possible way in terms of managing our transportation systems? Is the MBTA working properly? Do the regional transit authorities have the dollars to make sure that those areas bring the same kind of opportunity as Kendall Square, recognizing capacity? Those are all things that I've talked about, but I think we all need to talk about and continue forward on, because it really is our future. Young people today do not want to have cars. And so I'm talking to business leaders out in the 128 belt, and what's happening is their workforce is living in Boston. Now they're going to commute out to 128 because that's where the jobs are. And there's congestion and challenge, and there's not real transit connections to some of the business sections as there is in Kendall Square. So it's not just what is the solution. We need to plan better, but we also need to talk about what the key link to the economy is in Kendall Square. And I've said if the capacity, if the Red Line trains break down from 1969, you can't run the system. Capacity, people are waiting for 3 or 4 or 5 trains to go by before they can get to Kendall Square. Are you going to see that investment in Kendall Square? Never mind anywhere else. And you're not going to see it. So we have to get people to recognize that. Build the trust back up, put the dollars into the system, make sure we do best practices, make sure that we're always addressing how we can do it better in terms of how we run the system, as transparent as possible. And then hopefully we have a real honest, rational discussion about expansion investment and what it means for our future economy. It really is linked to our ability to make it happen at the legislative level.
Mayor?
Just to add further to that, and on something you and the Senator have touched upon, those statistics point to this incredible demographic shift that has occurred in this country, the likes that we have not seen since the 1950s. Everybody who's escaping the urban cores and the downtowns today, you have baby boomers, you have millennials, and in some of them we have the hipsters and the abnormals, we call them. But everybody is moving and wants to live and work in the lifestyle centers. Why is Somerville? Because they want to be in areas that are connected by good transit, that are walkable, that are bikeable. So communities in business districts that are planning beyond motor vehicle traffic for new transit, for multimodal capacity, are the ones that are going to succeed. Christopher Lineberger from the Brookings Institute has a great op-ed called Death of the Fringe Suburb, no offense, a little over a year ago, but it speaks to the great dynamic. And even in the suburbs, you can see this in Burlington and other places, they're building these smaller downtown lifestyle areas. People want to live in those areas, connected to culture, academia, healthcare, to jobs, and very mobile communities. Somerville, in the last several years, in the deepest abyss of this recession, our local economy grew because our walk score shot from wherever it was up to 10th in the country. Bike score to 8th in the country. And we leveraged that to our geographic strength. And that is the key to understanding. You mentioned planning for the future. As a Commonwealth, we need to think about where are those opportunities to increase that multimodal capacity, and planning your transportation dollars around there. Not just around fixing potholes, which is important. And I've got more potholes than you can shake a stick at in Somerville. But, you know, if we want people to be active, and people who want to be active in healthy lifestyle communities, that's how we need to think about it. And industry wants to be in those communities.
John, did you have?
Yeah. I would agree with both the mayor and the senator in what they've just said. And I'm an advocate of comprehensive planning and looking at problems and solutions that go from highways to non-motorized transportation and everything in between, which is, I think, what you've done a fine job in the city of Cambridge doing for years. And I think we have to do that in the entire region, okay, in Central Mass and in Western Mass. I can tell you that in Pioneer Valley area, we do that partly because the universities have a major role, and we think very much like those of you in Cambridge. And I have this very much of a view where we have to look at all the options. But again, I come back to the need for a strategic financing plan which is stable, isn't easily impacted by any little thing that takes place in the economy, and if such phenomena do take place in the economy, we have strategies to offset that. I think layering on top of what I've said about financing, I think we in Massachusetts haven't looked at public-private partnerships to the extent other states have in getting the financial industry, private transportation operators, private traffic information providers involved like many other states have. In which case, we're now talking about reform, changing the way we do business to try to reduce costs, while at the same time trying to spread the limited dollars that we have so we can do more with less.
Thank you. Other questions?
I just wanted to follow up on that piece. On the public-private partnerships, I'm from Indiana, Richmond, so they sold a tollway there. That's the kind of thing you're talking about, where the private sector buys bridges?
That's an example of what I'm talking about. And I've followed the Indiana toll road experience and know that the state was given a great opportunity to receive $4 billion from a private concessionaire who now operates their toll road and eliminated the need for the state of Indiana to increase taxes, fees, etc. Until 2 or 3 years later, when the tolls were going up every year. But people have to understand that that's what it takes in order to get involved in a public-private partnership. I'm not suggesting that that's what we need to do here in Massachusetts with the Turnpike. There are a lot of considerations that have to be taken into account to see what public-private partnership works best. There are other examples. The Route 3 example that was considered a number of years ago, I think, is something that we could revisit as a way of, again, seeing how we can get the private sector involved And not just in managing and operating, but also in investing. But when they invest, they're in that to make money, and we have to understand that, for example, going back to the state of Indiana, the way that concessionaire was going to get the return on the investment was by being able to increase the tolls on some rate indexed to inflation, which was all written, of course, in the agreement. The fact was that the public hadn't read the fine print until 3 or 4 years later.
Political viability of those kind of arrangements starts to get a little shaky.
Go ahead.
Just to interject here, if you don't mind, and I'm only saying this because currently now I'm doing all the public-private partnerships in other parts of the country. There are different models. There's the full monetization, selling it off, as John and you just referred to in Indiana. Very different from the model that we have. Ours is much more a publicly owned partnership. It's a concession agreement over a 35-year life where a concessionaire can manage the project, and it's paid throughout the life of the project, but only paid if the concessionaire meets performance standards set by the state or the locality. So in effect, you actually have more control in some ways. It's not for every project, and there may be none in Massachusetts where it's appropriate, but it's certainly a tool, and when I refer to the finance plan that was done several years ago, or the suggestions, it's a tool that is mentioned there as something that states are looking to more and more. So for us, and we do, for example, our fund is all public pensions. They want to invest in the communities that the mayor talked about. And they're not looking for the big hedge fund returns. It's a sort of much more, sort of long view. So it's a tool. I think it gets to John's point that there are multiple tools out there. We've got to really consider all of them, and you've got to look at your whole comprehensive plan. I love, though, what the mayor is and what the senator are talking about in terms of the urban cores. I mean, that's true throughout the country. It's those places where we really have to think holistically, and these are the great places for strategic investment, and that's exactly what the president's talking about with the infrastructure fund.
Jane, and can I add to that? And thank you for setting the different models in what we call triple Ps. This country lags far behind much of the world, and that's a fact. The legislature has given some tools that we've leveraged, again, where we've taken district improvement finance and infrastructure investment incentive to I-cubed, used that incremental net growth and revenue growth to partner with the private sector and the state and federal government to leverage the opportunities in Assembly Square. That type of value capture, those tools are out there, and we're not exploiting those enough. So they can fit into one of the different models of a public-private partnership, and we've shown that it could work. But there are great opportunities there where you're not just relying on the taxpayer, straightly on the taxpayer dollar.
Thank you. I think there was another question, a couple questions over here, too.
That's interesting because I know there's a bond bill coming up later in the year, but is it possible, because I kind of hear a lot of the same stories if the mayor goes back to the Red Line in Somerville, or, most of the general public is probably unaware of what's happening in Assembly Square Mall unless they see the kind of the development. Or another story, I see Peter's here, Quincy Center. I'm sure most people are not even aware there's going to be a brand new Quincy Center in the next decade or so. Is there a way, I think the missing link is almost, the state is now siloed almost against the cities and towns. Is there a way to focus where really the T stations or the highway access, whatever is needed, is driven by the Assembly Square malls of the state? And so I know the MPOs exist, but they're so low profile. Is there another way to get the public focused on that? And therefore, what we're talking about isn't about a revenue issue. It's not about a transportation mode issue. It's about the economic issue, which is far better debate to have.
That's a great point. I think the MPO issue is, first of all, I don't think anybody understands the MPO issue, including legislators. And it's an arcane process. We have actually changed it a bit recently. But there's a lot of talk about, as we go through the transportation bond, if we're going to make an investment and we're going to increase revenues by $800 million, how do you transparently make the right decisions to make the investments we need to make in terms of the future? And that needs to be part of the discussion. I think that will be going on as we go through the transportation bond. I think initially we wanted to get a financing piece in place so then we could have these larger discussions about where do we move forward, what's the right planning, how do we link it to economic development. So that's a great point, and I think we recognize that. In terms of the public-private partnership, part of the 2009 reform included creating a commission, which recently was put together and is looking at private-public partnerships. That'll be moving forward. So there's a lot of things going on, but we need to have a real plan in terms of what makes sense and how it is linked to the economic development. And I think we're starting to take advantage of it. I think the mayor talked about it a little bit. When you have all these rail places that go through your community, don't stop. We have not taken advantage at all of the transit-oriented development opportunities. We're starting to do that. I mean, Boston, the Central Artery clearly has provided that. Somerville's an example, but in most other places that hasn't happened. So we need to have that discussion as to where the investments come and how we can tap into that private investment. And I'll just finish. I was in Japan last March and got a chance to ride on the high-speed rail, which is amazing, 220 miles in an hour and 40 minutes. It's just unbelievable. The thing that amazed me the most was the huge development going on at every transit station wherever we went. It's just unbelievable. And that's where the dollars are in terms of the creating the economic boom from the access to the transit. And we have not done that here. We're starting to take advantage of that. But it keys into how do we do it, what's the best plan, how do we make the MPOs more transparent, and I think even if your area doesn't have the investment, but people can say, okay, the investment that they are making is a sensible investment, even if it's not where we wanted our investment today. We know tomorrow we're going to get our investment.
If I can add to that, there is not one agency in the Commonwealth driving that planning strategy. That's a problem. So unless you have a mayor or a city manager knocking on that agency's door saying, I have 146 acres on the Mystic River between Route 28 and the 93 where 2 rail lines go through, less than a mile from downtown Boston, help me out, and still I have to fight for it for years. It's not going to get done. And what I do want to, and there are very few, but one of the things I liked about what Governor Romney did was the Office of Commonwealth Development. That was an attempt to bring synergy to economic development, environment, transportation. All those agencies play a role in the planning. Right now it is a project-based approach based on local advocacy. We bring it to you, you react. I have down the road, a half mile down the road from Assembly Square, more than 200 acres of underdeveloped land that the Green Line is going to go through. That abuts North Point, where we have 5.3 acres, along with Cambridge and Boston. The state hasn't once come to me and said, how can we unlock that opportunity for the Commonwealth? Cambridge did North Point on their own. You planned Somerville also, but that's okay. We'll let you do that. And we're doing the Inner Belt and Brick Bottom and Union Square. But that's been our own advocacy. Those are opportunities. We need that administrative leadership to say, how can we unlock that for your local community, for the Commonwealth? Or else we'll end up playing the short game in our communities rather than the long game.
And I just want to follow up on that because I think, I could talk about the Blue Line, and we have 300 acres of master plan development available around the commuter rail stop in Lynn that is an empty garage because people don't use the commuter rail in Lynn. We have 170 open acres, 100 on the waterfront, 70 acres right on the rail line where the GE is. But more importantly, take a look at Springfield, Chicopee, and Holyoke and think about those 3 communities that are almost in a triangle, completely connected in some ways with really challenges in terms of economic development. If you put in place a real transportation plan for the Springfield triangle for Pioneer Valley, you'd see the same kind of opportunity, particularly when you're talking about Quebec government wants Montreal to Boston service and all of the things. So we need to have a better plan in place and where those dollars go. We need to, you're right, there is no, it's project-centric. And I was struggling with, with this whole idea of, a 10-year plan and project-specific and recognizing that I have my own project that I've been fighting for, and people have been fighting for since 1946, the Blue Line to Lynn. I've seen the plans, but the reality is you can't be project specific because then you end up everybody battling to limited dollars. You need to have a better plan, and I think the point is very well taken. I guess the question is, how do we get there? Is it the MPOs? Is it a larger process? But we need to address that, and I think getting the revenues is the first step, but also having a plan in place that allows the whole Commonwealth to access the investments that are going to grow our economy.
John,
Jane, I was just going to add, while we're talking about public-private partnerships, I feel compelled to also emphasize that there are public-public partnerships, and Those are very important, whether it be the city of Somerville working with the T or the city of Boston, to make something happen in Somerville. A good example is also what Massport has done with the T in providing the Silver Line service from the airport to downtown. And for those of you who are not aware of this, it's free of charge. You come into Logan and you get to downtown crossing. And I can't think of anything better for a tourist who visits Boston, wants to get downtown, flies into Logan, doesn't know where they are. And it's those kinds of partnerships that are very important, and it doesn't require a lot of extra dollars. And what it also does is it gets people at Massport and other public agencies to realize how they benefit from the investments that are being made by other transportation agencies.
Good point. Time for one last question, or are you? One more, sure. There seemed to be a question here. Yes.
I represent the Massachusetts chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and I wanted to offer a comment and a question. The comment was specific to, we were just talking about public-private partnerships, and in the House budget that just passed last night, as part of the base budget as an outside section, there's actually another commission to specifically, I think it was intended to look at the Route 3 proposal that came to the unsolicited proposal that came to the government. But they're putting a commission together to look at design, bid, build, operate options for horizontal construction, but they've also expanded it to look at vertical construction for schools, for dorms, so on and so forth. I hope that the Senate will look at that favorably when it gets time for them to look at that. Now for the question. Senator, you had mentioned that the the transportation bill that was just passed by the Senate is sort of a first step, and I agree with that. And in full disclosure, our organization is fully supportive of you and the governor's proposal. We'd love to see more. But with that being said, you passed a bill that had $300 million more than the House, and I think it would be fair to say that when you were envisioning that, there was some thought as to this isn't just going to be for the status quo, there will be some sort of expansion in there. I'm not asking you to tell us what you were envisioning in terms of specific projects, but hopefully you might tell us a little bit about what your thoughts were in terms of what the expansions might be. And more importantly, a little bit about what your thoughts are in terms of when this finally gets to conference, you are going to have to convince the House that your proposal is the one that should prevail. And what I'd like you to help us with is how organizations like mine or organizations like T4Mass, which I know the mayor is very involved in, how we can help you through the conference process to prevail on the House that the Senate version is the correct version.
I think there's been an ongoing positive discussion from business leaders around the Commonwealth, and I think we really worked hard for the last couple of years to build that support with the recognition of what is the real need, and I've talked about this. What is the real need? Let's forget about whose plan we're talking about, the governor's plan, our plan, the House plan. It's what's the real need and what's the goal here, and so I think discussion in a positive way about what the real need is and what we need to do, and that's what we've been talking about here this morning in terms of our economy and what it's going to mean. And I think the extra dollars allow us not only to get the employees off capital and forward fund the RTA and get the T on level footing, but it allows us to start to have some more dollars available. So 2 or 3 years out from now, we're going to have an opportunity to look at those expansions and make real decisions on where we go forward. And I also think as we continue to implement the reform and build the public trust, that we're going to be able to continue to have a discussion about how we continue to move this forward. That's why I think it is a first step. And I thought the Senate President's words at the Boston Chamber recently, where she talked about that. This isn't just 1 year, this is an every year discussion. It was an important part of what we're talking about. But I think continue to talk about the need and in a positive way and how these investments are really going to be transformative in terms of our economy. I think the facts are there. I think we need to continue to build on that. So I would just suggest, and I said this earlier, we stayed within the framework, but we pushed the envelope in terms of the dollars. So hopefully we'll be able to bring the House to the point that this is a fair and reasonable plan, and we're putting enough dollars on the table to to allow us to look at those type of expansions over time as we get our hands around the current problem, but also move forward. So I would say that voicing support for the plan and continuing to voice the facts on the need, from your perspective and from all of our perspective. The need is clear. I mean, the numbers, I tell people all the time, we don't make these numbers up. These numbers consistently have been, from all different spectrums, our real need. And this is not unique to Massachusetts. Sometimes we get caught in a, well, Massachusetts, we haven't run it right, or it's our problem and nobody else is. Every state is facing this. Nationally, it's a $2 trillion problem. And you can read day to day, Maryland and Texas and Virginia grappling with how they're going to come up with their dollars. Utah recently indicated they're going to need to invest by 2040 between $45 and $70 billion in transportation. This is a national problem. So we need to continue to talk about the importance of this, the need, and that this is a real need. The dollars that we're talking about aren't some kind of, we just picked them out of the sky. Those numbers are legit, and I think that is helpful as we move forward. So that the public, I think, is recognizing that, and I think as we continue to talk about the need and lay the facts out on the table, it'll allow us to hopefully move forward in a positive way, build a good consensus around a bill we all can feel comfortable with, and move forward.
On that note, and I think that's an excellent summary here of what we need to do and what we need to focus on over the next several months. This is going to be an important discussion, an important bill, and I want to thank the panel very much for participating in this discussion this morning. Thank you. Thank you all.
I want to thank the panel as well. Reference was made to the transportation bond issue of 1973. It was really, it was created by the planners from the metropolitan area. Bonnie Frank and I filed the bill. It was really at the insistence of Kevin White, who wanted to move the Red Line station from Ashmont out to Quincy. And if you think about the impact that it had on communities like Milton, Weymouth, Braintree, and Quincy, it has just been phenomenal. Well, we had, in my old district of North Cambridge, 60,000 automobiles coming into the Alewife area every single morning and leaving every night, and that meant congestion through the city and town streets of Arlington, Belmont, and Cambridge. So we extended the Red Line from Harvard Square down the avenue to Porter Square, Davis Square, which was frankly an afterthought. And ultimately, it was supposed to go to Arlington Heights and Route 128. But it did stop the congestion. It freed up a great capability in all those communities. It allowed people to breathe a little easier than it had ever been allowed to beforehand. It allowed the worker classes to move in and out of that community so that they could continue to work and live where they wanted to live. But it also helped thrive in a highly economic way, as the mayor has pointed out. What it has done for Davis Square, what it has done for Porter Square, and what it's done for the Alewife area have just been terrific kind of aftershocks of what you can do when you do correct planning. The key, though, is communication. The key is to get your leaders to talk, whether they're from the private sector or the electeds, to let people know that beyond the tax dollar being levied, there's an awful lot of good that's going to be generated because of it. And as I say that, Peter Foreman is here, a former state legislator who now heads up the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. Yesterday took a vote by his board to increase the gas tax by 3 cents. We might not agree on the amount of money that they all agreed to, but the fact of the matter is to have the leadership of the business community in that sector of our Commonwealth come out and provide that kind of voice, it's really, truly very important. What we need are more of these seminars, more of these forums, and more of these discussions to take place. Jane, thank you very much. John, Mayor, Senator. By the way, it was your old man who was the Speaker of the House who allowed us to get that legislation filed and passed. Thanks, everybody, and good morning.